Is Missouri going to live up to the high hopes after an 11-2 2023 season? Well, they've kind of got the schedule to do it, which we'll get to. John Miller of Locked On Mizzou joining me here on Locked On College Football. And John, I don't know that expectations have been this high in Missouri in quite some time after they burst onto the scene last year. Eli Drinkwitz gets the big extension, and there are just a lot of high hopes over there with the Tigers going into this season. Spring football has gotten underway. What priorities do they need to be focused on to reach their goals in 2024?
I think on the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to start with cornerback. I think that's one of the biggest strengths of Missouri and their defense the past couple of years. Chris Abrams-Drain, Ennis Rakestraw, a couple guys who maybe day one or two type selections. I'd say Abrams-Drain, both of those guys probably first couple, 3 rounds. So that allowed Missouri to be really aggressive, play a lot of man-to-man on the outside. Are they going to be able to do that this season? New defensive coordinator, Blake Baker, moved on to LSU. So there's a few question marks defensively, but for the most part, I think we're fine there. If anything, I'm more worried about special teams. New place kicker. Punter was a question last year, still a bit of a question, and really Missouri special teams have been up and down under Drinkwitz. Those are my biggest questions.
And kicker, of course, you can't overlook that. Their marquee win early in the season against Kansas State. Who could forget the 61-yarder? I mean, absolute nails. So as spring football gets underway, what about what they've done this offseason? Are there new pieces that are going to be integral to their success in 2024? And who are those names that people need to know when you think about, how is Missouri going to have another double-digit win season?
Well, since I mentioned corner, one of the first guys is Toriano Pride, a transfer from Clemson. He's from East St. Louis, so Missouri was really on him out of high school. Well, eventually that relationship has paid some dividends a couple years later. But one guy to really look for is Caden Green, offensive lineman from Oklahoma this past season. He was a true freshman, I believe, at Oklahoma, played virtually every snap for the Sooners at left guard, played a little bit left tackle too. Missouri's going to probably plug him in at left tackle. They've got a couple spots, left tackle and one of the guard spots to fill in as well. But I really expect that Missouri's offensive line is going to be pretty good again. Again, it's nice to not only be able to take a nice offensive lineman from the portal, add him to your roster, but also at the expense of one of your opponents next season in the Oklahoma Sooners.
Yeah, Oklahoma will travel to Missouri in a classic SEC battle, if I've ever heard one.
Oh, yeah, just all the way back 50 years
I know,
ago.
the history goes, it goes back to before I was born, John, last time I checked.
Can't you hear it now? Yeah,
I can indeed. But the returners on this Missouri team, look, there are not many teams, not just in the SEC, but in all of college football, that can say they return their head coach and their quarterback from last year's team. You look around the SEC, Georgia can say that, Ole Miss can say that, but teams like Alabama cannot, Texas A&M cannot, LSU cannot, Auburn, don't know what's going to happen to the quarterback position down there. Maybe they can, but that's one of the reasons that I feel good about Missouri going into this season. You've got the same offensive system. You've got Brady Cook back. You've got Luther Burden at wide receiver, a good recruiting class and a good portal class coming in this year for the Tigers. How important is it to have that continuity for this Missouri team as they look to make an SEC championship game?
Oh, I think it means everything. I think you see it in this sport over and over again, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Man, if you have an experienced quarterback, and now Brady Cook, obviously by far his best season last year. This will now be his 3rd year as a starter, also his 5th year in the program with Eli Drinkwitz the entire time. So he knows what's expected of him. He now has gone from a guy the previous offseason for a big portion of the fan base was kind of a punching bag. Now he's the big man on campus, and everybody loves the guy all of a sudden. And the good news is I think Brady Cook is the kind of young man who's very level-headed and grounded. He's not going to let any of that bother him in a negative way. I think it's all good there. Not worried about him whatsoever. And to your point, Missouri has a ton of continuity at the receiver position too. all four, I think, of their top receivers are back. You're talking about not only Luther Burden, but Theo Weiss, hey, another Oklahoma transfer from last season. Also, Mookie Cooper decided to come back, real speedster slot type player. And then I really think Marquise Johnson, who to me had the key deep pass that finally opened up the Cotton Bowl offensively for Missouri, also had a key plays in other parts of the game, including a fake punt against Kentucky that turned that game around too. Watch for Marquise Johnson. I mean, I don't think there's a team in the country that has four receivers that I'd be any more confident in than the Tigers right now.
Yeah, I like what they've got back offensively, and the combination of talent, experience, and continuity is a hard one. A lot of places have talent and experience, but they haven't all played together. And you can even look at some of the best rosters in all of college football and find that to be the case. But just before we get to Missouri's schedule and why it works out so favorably, perhaps factoring into why their win total is 9.5. I mean, this is Missouri football we're talking about here. As someone who doesn't have a great history of being a fan in the SEC, well, I'm not a fan of the SEC. I've been watching the SEC, of course, for a long time because I'm a college football fan, but Missouri football has been off a lot of people's national radar for quite a while, but they burst onto the scene last year. What is the mood and the vibe around the program right now?
Oh, it's the most hype I've seen for an offseason in at least 10 years. Missouri did make an SEC championship appearance, actually 2 in a row in 2013 and 2014. So certainly between those two seasons, massive hype the next year as well. So, I mean, it's been a good decade since then of Missouri, wanting to just kind of turn it around. And finally, it seems like we're getting there in the post-Gary Pinkel era. So it'll be interesting. Hopefully we'll get some nice weather for the spring game coming up here in a couple weeks, get a big crowd. But, Missouri is never going to have 75,000 people for the spring game like Georgia or something like that. But I promise you, when the games kick off next year, it's going to be sellout every single game as long as everything just goes reasonably well.
And the schedule sets up for that to be the case for Eli Drinkwitz and company. So there is no LSU on this schedule for Missouri. That's just one of several breaks that they've got. I'll run through the 12 games Missouri's got on the docket, and you'll understand why, with all the returning experience and everything we've talked about, their win total's 9.5, according to our friends at FanDuel. Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt. Those are 4 games at home. Those should all be wins. At Texas A&M on October 5th. Come back home, host UMass. That's a win. October 19th against Auburn at home. At Alabama, host Oklahoma. And then close with South Carolina and Mississippi State on the road and hosting Arkansas. I see 2 games on here where Missouri isn't going to be the favorite, John. I think 10-11 wins could be in the cards for the Tigers this year if all goes according to plan.
It's definitely on the table. There's no doubt about it. Heck, Missouri's over-under last season was 6.5, and they raced by that quite easily. Now, of course, every year's different. The expectations are so much higher for Missouri this season. But I'm with you. I think the word I would use to describe that schedule is navigable. It's not easy. I wouldn't say it's easy because no SEC schedule is easy. You're having to go to Tuscaloosa. Listen, I know Oklahoma's maybe not what they were thought of during the Lincoln Riley era, but that's still an incredibly formidable program. Auburn, who knows? Maybe year 2 of Hugh Freeze. Maybe they
Auburn
start
should
to
be
figure
solid.
it out a little more. Who the heck knows with Auburn? Let's be honest. They can be up here or they can be down here. Every once in a while they win the national title, but more often than not you're scratching your head. So maybe this is one of the good years for Auburn, just for example. So
yeah,
not a cakewalk by any means, but obviously, as you said, Missouri avoids LSU. They avoid Georgia. Kentucky
and they avoid
is always a tricky game.
Yep, Kentucky. They avoid Texas
too,
as well. So no Georgia, no LSU,
no doubt,
and no Texas.
Yes,
those are things that I look at it from an SEC scheduling standpoint and say, boy, it does not get a whole heck of a lot better than that.
It fell nicely for Missouri, but I will say, if it does come down to, say, some 3-way tie for a spot in the SEC title game, that could potentially backfire on Missouri, because say Missouri has one loss, Georgia has one loss, Texas has one loss. Well, the winner of that game, if they play each other, there's a mutual opponent. I actually don't have I'm just trying to give an example here. Well, then Missouri wouldn't have a mutual opponent, and therefore they would get left out. So there is a slight downside to this schedule, but again, just from a perspective of, hey, our friends over at FanDuel, maybe you want to put some action on it, 9.5, yeah, it's navigable. It really is.
John Miller, Locked On Missouri. You can catch him on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Locked On Mizzou, Mizzou. John, thanks so much for stopping by.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Spencer.
Coming up next, 3 dark horse teams to make the college football playoff in 2024 all over the country.